sovereignty, or defund, dismantle the police, or I did wish you brought this up at the end. You know, she tweeted out a bail fund 4 days after police precinct was burned to the ground, and then said they're not going to stop rioting, shouldn't stop rioting, and we're not going to stop rioting.
In my defense, Sean,
our Senator J.D. Vance is with us. Senator,
good to see you, man.
You know, it was funny when I first interviewed you at the RNC. We knew each other, but we didn't know each other well.
Of course.
And I was supposed to have you for like a 10-minute interview. I think I kept you there like 30 minutes.
That's right.
By the way, I hope you're not doing anything for the next half hour. You're welcome to stay.
I don't know if I can stay that long tonight.
And as I was watching you tonight, I felt like you really got a chance to introduce yourself to the American people. And I felt it was extraordinarily effective because now that I've gotten to know you, that's the person that I know.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I just wanted to talk about issues, right? I saw this as an opportunity to get 90 minutes with the American people. It's an unbelievable opportunity for a person who wants to be the next vice president, and you should just make it as much as possible about substance. And you know, one of the things I tried to do, Sean, obviously is criticize Kamala Harris's record, but also remind the American people that Donald Trump is not the caricature that Kamala Harris and the media have made him out to be, that he was an incredibly effective president for 4 years in the Oval Office, and he actually solved problems, right? I think most Americans, Democrats, Republicans, people in the middle, they're sick of Congress being like a high-class debating society. They actually want their elected leaders to do something to solve the country's problems. Donald Trump did that more than any person I've sort of observed in my 40 years of being on this earth, and it was such a good opportunity for me to just make that point to the American people. We had low inflation, things were going well, the world was more peaceful, and actually, Sean, it's an easier argument to make tonight, I hate to say it, because of the incredible tragedy unfolding in Israel, which looks increasingly like it could become a broader regional conflict. Like when the world is going to crap and it looks increasingly more violent, you want steady, proven leadership. That's Donald Trump, not Kamala Harris, the person who has sort of broken the entire world. And I just tried to make that point as much as possible, man. Just make it about substance and let the American people make up their mind.
One of the things is I was watching the 181 ballistic missiles being fired from Iran into Israel, and I'm so thankful they got most of them down, but they're now really fighting a forefront war. And I just know in the back of my mind that there is this radical anti-Israel, anti-Semitic even wing within the Democratic Party that I just believe that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz don't want to alienate. And unfortunately, evil is evil. And Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, they have in their charter, they've stated over and over, they want to wipe Israel off the map. We hear it in the halls of Congress, college campuses. This is a serious, their very existence is at risk here.
No, that's exactly right. And of course, not just their existence, but America's national security here. But if Iran becomes a regional hegemon, it will have a nuclear weapon the next week. That will seriously endanger the United States of America, because the Iranians have shown they're clearly not rational. But you think about this happened, Sean, because of confused policy from American leadership. We ask ourselves, like, how did it get to the point where Iran is launching 200 ICBMs at America's most important regional ally? And the answer is because they don't actually know where Kamala Harris stands. Now, you talk about how they've cozied up to sort of this weird pro-Hamas wing within their own party. Well, they're doing that, of course, because of political reasons, but it shows that confusion that comes out of that policy invites a lot of aggression, invites a lot of bad guys doing terrible things, and it also, Sean, motivates a lot of really stupid policy. 200 ICBMs, that's not cheap. Iran has a lot of other weapons. How did they fund it? Two reasons, Sean. Number one, Kamala Harris went to war against the American energy sector that radically increased the amount of oil revenue the Iranian regime was benefiting from. Number two, they unfroze $100 billion of Iranian assets. They're effectively handing these guys pallets of cash. The Iranians are buying weapons, and real leadership would be to say, we screwed up. We got something wrong. Let's go in another. Let's do what Donald Trump did, but they just can't do that because of the political reasons.
They turned a blind eye to the sanctions. The sanctions made they literally made Iran rich, and that allows them to fund these proxy wars. That's Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the Houthi rebels, and now Iran directly firing into Israel. And what should America's response be here?
Well, look, I think it's tough, Sean, because we don't have a president that we can actually trust. I don't even know who the president of the United States is. And that's one thing we didn't actually get into the debate that I really wanted to hammer Kamala Harris on, is that for 3.5 years, America has been saddled with a president of the United States who can't do the job. And the reason is because Kamala Harris lied and said he was up to the job of president. And of course he wasn't. And now we're in this, we've got this terrible crisis in Appalachia, these terrible floods, a lot of people affected. We've got this regional war breaking out in the Middle East, and we don't have effective American leadership. Look, I think what our response is fundamentally, this is Israel's security, and they have to make the decision about how they're best going to protect their own security, and they need the support of their American allies, not Joe Biden, as confused as he is, standing behind them, effectively promising that he's going to punish them if they dare defend their own sovereignty and their own security. Israel is actually very good at this stuff. It's one of the great things about Israel as an ally, unlike, frankly, a lot of so-called American allies, is they have a viable military, they have a viable intelligence service. They're going to make their own decision about how to protect their sovereignty. I think our role here, support our friends, and also get back to some common sense foreign and economic policies so that we can be strong enough to respond to the next national security challenge.
Let me ask you, you kept bringing up a point that I felt was very effective in this debate, and that is, she's been vice president nearly 4 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, on day one, I'm going to fix inflation. On day one, I'm going to fix the border. On day one, I'm going to do this and that. And, you know, and Walz kept bringing up the issue of immigration.
Yes.
You brought up the 90-some-odd executive orders that they bragged about.
That's right.
But also for 3 years, they said the border is secure, and Harris wants to decriminalize illegal immigration, offer free food, housing, health care, education, sex change operations, amnesty on top of it. And we have all these unvetted illegal immigrants. Now, dozens of Americans have been murdered. I had the parents of 2 of them on last night, Rachel Morin's mom and Jocelyn Nungary. Many Americans have been raped, including children. We have other victims of violent crime, unvetted Harris-Biden illegals.
It's awful. It's atrocious.
The cost is through the roof. And I think America understands it, but you also brought up other aspects, how it impacts education and the economy and housing and the high cost of housing.
Look, man, so much of our problem is actually due to Kamala Harris's open border. You take 25 million illegal aliens, so take a small community, let's say you've got a school district of 4,000 or 5,000 kids. Now all of a sudden you add 1,000 kids who can't speak English, through no fault of their own, of course, but of course the American education system, the education for our kids suffers in the process. Hospital wait times, a point I actually didn't get to make this evening, but hospital wait times have gotten longer and longer. Why? Because a lot of illegal aliens go to the hospital emergency room to get medical care. Well, that means American citizens aren't able to be seen by a doctor quickly. Housing is, I think, actually the biggest issue. A major driver of housing costs is that you have millions of foreigners who are illegally in the country who are competing with Americans for scarce homes. That's supply and demand and shoots the cost of housing through the roof. And this is why I talk about substance. My goal was to talk about substance tonight, because I think a lot of Americans sort of intuitively get this country's leadership has failed it. And I just try to explain as much as possible. Here's why Kamala Harris has been a failure. Here's why Donald Trump has been a success. And here's how we're going to clean up the mess that she created.
Let me ask one question as you were on the stage. Tim Walz seemed very nervous tonight. Now, I kind of walked away with the impression, I guess maybe I felt, maybe this is the reason he doesn't do interviews. He seemed, did it come across as nervous to you?
Honestly, I didn't notice it, man. Adrenaline's going so much. I was nervous. I mean, hell, like I do a lot of these interviews, Sean, but I was nervous. It's the biggest stage of my life. So I didn't focus so much on his demeanor. I just tried to focus on what he was saying. And look, to be fair to Tim Walz, he had a very tough job, and that is to defend the policies of Kamala Harris.
This is a great
that
moment
have driven.
For you to bring that up.
Yeah,
he did have a tough job.
He does. And look, it's Kamala Harris has done this. Her policy failures have made food, housing, energy unaffordable. We just need a change in this country. We need to get back to the common sense leadership of Donald Trump. I'm not surprised that Tim couldn't defend that record. Who could? If you put me on that debate stage, I mean, you clearly think I did a good job. I hope that I did a good job. But if you asked me to defend Kamala Harris's record, I'd melt into a puddle because there is no defending what she's done the last 3.5 years.
Let's talk about the #1 issue in just about every poll for most Americans is the economy.
Yeah.
I mean, we have record high inflation. When Donald Trump left office, it was 1.4%. It's up 20+% higher.
That's right.
Everybody knows, because I go shopping every week myself. Every store we go to, every item we buy costs more. If you want to buy a house, maybe if you want to change homes, you're not going to give up your 2.9 or 3 or 3.5 or 4% mortgage for a 7% 30-year fixed rate mortgage.
Yeah.
These are the bread and butter issues. If peace and prosperity drive elections, well, we got war in Europe, war in the Middle East, and we've got an economy that is struggling, and wide open borders that has made our country not safe.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sean. I mean, look, you know, I grew up in a working class family. Sometimes we did okay. Sometimes times were really tough. And I can't help but think about this through the eyes of a family that's struggling to make ends meet, where people are sort of looking at the credit card bills, they're looking at the groceries, they're looking at the medical expenses, and they're saying, we can maybe afford 2 of these 3 things, but we can't afford all 3. Right. And I just want Americans, I want, you know, if you're struggling in this country and you're looking to the future, I want you to look to the future from a place of hope and optimism. I want you to believe the American dream is still possible, because I really do believe it's still possible, Sean, but man, only if we get the policies that actually make sense for the American people. I mean, you know, the thing that I've learned most the last 8 weeks, man, I've had such an insight into this country, and it's so amazing. People come up and ask me how I'm doing, and sometimes I'm talking about people who are struggling in a very big way, and it's sort of like, you know, I kind of had this like eureka moment of, if all of these American citizens are so concerned about the guy running for vice president when they themselves can't afford groceries, there is a generosity of spirit in this country that is so amazing. We need a leader who actually matches up with that generosity of spirit, a leader who's fit to lead the greatest nation in the world. We don't have it now. I think we're about to have it starting on November 5th.
You know, it was interesting because I remember Kamala had said about the high price of energy. Now, I would think it matters to the people of Pennsylvania and your state of Ohio on the issue of fracking.
Of course.
And she doesn't want offshore drilling. One of the things that I feel, with 35 days left and early voting starting, she has not answered why she co-sponsored the Green New Deal. It's paid for by taxpayers, amnesty when people don't respect our laws, border sovereignty, or defund, dismantle the police. Or I did wish you brought this up at the end. You know, she tweeted out a bail fund 4 days after police precinct was burned to the ground, and then said they're not going to stop rioting, shouldn't stop rioting, and we're not going to stop rioting.
In my defense, Sean, there's so much to whack Kamala Harris about with her record that you only had 90 minutes. I didn't have 4 hours. But no, man, look, you're absolutely right here that her policies, it's not just that she did these things. She, in some cases, went out and bragged about opening the border. She bragged about how she wanted to divert resources away from police officers. She bragged about the Green New scam, which, of course, is one of the main drivers of energy and food prices. She bragged about this stuff. It happened, and Americans have suffered from it. Now, you made a good point. She hasn't answered for any of this. Well, Sean, in her defense, she hasn't answered for anything because she refuses to sit down for interviews.
Don't do press conferences or interviews for crying out loud.
Okay, like, honestly.
By the way, I will offer Kamala and Tim Walz a whole week's worth of shows if they'd come.
No, Sean, I legitimately believe, no kidding, that you would be a much more fair interviewer of Kamala Harris than, for example, like Dana Bash was with me.
Right.
But you go on Dana Bash's show, you go on Sean Hannity, you go wherever you can, because if you want to be the vice president of the United States, you ought to earn it. You ought to get out there and talk to the American people. And I think it's the most scandalous part of her entire campaign is that she's running from a basement, hiding from the very people that she wants to lead, while you have a contrast of Donald Trump, who not only was a successful president once, but is so eager to get out there and make his case to the American people that he's doing multiple rallies a day, multiple interviews with news leaders. That is the kind of guy with the energy that you need to actually run this country.
You know, one of the things I think you look for in a debate is tone, pitch, cadence, intelligence. Does that person have the ability to step in, God forbid, if you have to become the president of the United States. At the end of the day, I felt this was maybe for people that had a caricature of you. You mentioned one of Donald Trump. I think that came across tonight. You had a good time?
I had a lot of fun, man. And yeah,
on a scale of 1 to 10, how nervous were you?
Like an 11.
By the way, it is a big moment. There's only 70 million people or so watching.
Exactly. It's a very big moment, and yeah, I saw it as an opportunity to look directly at the American people and communicate the ways in which I thought we could do better.
Yale, right? There was one person ahead of you, if I'm not mistaken.
No, there were a lot of people ahead of me, including my wife. I think she was number one. Yeah,
she was number one.
She was way ahead of me.
Yeah.
But no, man, it's such a cool opportunity to get to talk to the American people, to get to make your case to them, to get to remind them like Kamala Harris's policies have been a failure. And I tried as much as possible to make it about policy, because I think that's where Donald Trump is such a better candidate, but most importantly, a much better president than these guys.
Look at the record low unemployment for every demographic: African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, women in the workplace.
Rising take-home pay. In the biggest and most significant acceleration in 40 years in this country. I mean, you go back, there's a chart, Sean, that I was obsessed with in college, where you look at the wages of working class people, black, brown, white, whatever their skin color, and it basically kind of stagnates for like 30 years. And then all of a sudden this thing happens where it shoots right up, and that's the presidency of Donald J. Trump. It's an amazing record to run on. And not only were there wages of all these working people of every skin color going up, but then inflation was between 1.5% and 2% the entire time that he was president. It's the best economic record of any president, at least since World War II. And man, it's not just like, look, I'm running with the guy. I love to brag on Donald Trump's economic record. People were happier and healthier. Families like mine could afford the essentials because